Welcome, everybody. On behalf of the Monhegan Associates, I am Crystal Lindquist. I'm a board member of Monhegan Associates. And as you know, tonight's lecture will be recorded. And if all goes well, it will be posted on the Monhegan Associates website within a few weeks. If all goes well. So a big thank you to the Monhegan Associates for sponsoring our lecture series. Thank you to members of the Monhegan Associates Ecology Committee that coordinates the lecture series. Big thank you to Jim Galvin for coordinating this recording technology, including the X on the floor. And thank you to all of you for coming and for supporting us through donations. And if you're not a member of Monhegan Associates, we have membership envelopes here. We encourage you to take one if you're considering it. Your support makes possible programs like this. I feel like I'm an MTN announcer. Your support makes possible such shows as Masterpiece Theater and the Ecology Lecture Series. And all the work we do on the wildlands with the trails. All your hiking is made possible by the Monhegan Associates. What else? You can also donate through our website. Thank you for your support. We are a nonprofit. So we've got three more talks coming up after this one. I will just read it now because I never remember to read them at the end. They're all on a Thursday night. Next Thursday, Brett Ewald from the Cape May Observatory will be coming to talk about birds of Monhegan. If you've seen the book that's for sale around the island, he wrote that book and published it last summer. He's been leading bird tours out here forever, so he knows a lot about the bird life out here. The following Thursday, August 1st, David Foster, an ecologist, will be coming to talk about the Monhegan landscape. And the Thursday after that, August 8th, will be Shelby Perry, another ecologist from the Northeast Wilderness Trust. So should be some really interesting talks coming up. Hope to see you there. And I think that's it. So Karen Zimmermann, here from another island, Mount Desert Island. Yeah, why don't you come over?
That's what he said to do.
Get in the circle.
I'm obedient.
Yeah. So Karen is a Maine master naturalist and a registered Maine guide. Inspired by Kate Furbush, Maine botanist and illustrator, and other naturalists, Karen spends most days hiking, observing, learning about plants, and painting. She combines natural history notes with sketches from field observations, capturing the spirit of a living entity and its sense of place. And after the talk, you should all check out pages from her journal over there and some other learning tableau that she's created for us. Merging visual and verbal is a way to gain an understanding of the plant or animal in front of her and its place in the world around us. As a naturalist and an artist, Karen creates not just for her own pleasure, but to share stories. You'll be hearing some. By presenting small details in watercolor, she invites viewers to look at all nature has to offer more deeply, taking home new insights they may not have otherwise noticed, and to perhaps look differently at what is right under their feet and in their own backyard. So, thank you so much, Karen, for coming, and take it away.
Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight on this beautiful evening. Thank you, Jim, for being my slide advancer. I've never used it in person before. I used it with buttons, so I'm going to have to remember when I need to say next. So if there's big silence, just shout next. Take care of it. So this evening, we're going to be talking about all the extraordinary things that are actually right outside our door if we take the time to look. I know that there's one item that I'm going to talk about I've walked by for 60 years without seeing, and there's something about nature journaling and this different slant of light that makes you notice things you might not have noticed before. This evening, we're going to be looking primarily at slides from my journal, and they are the pictures of whatever object I've drawn. There's lots of notes scrawled around them. I'm not going to ask you to read the notes. They're just part of the graphic. So just think of them as talking points. We're looking at the image. I'm going to be sharing stories about the object itself, whatever I was painting. I might be telling stories about its history or where I found it or the circumstances under which I saw it. And I might also be talking a little bit about how I did it, with if it was pencil or watercolor or different kind of paper, so there's technique involved as well. So 3 different things, maybe a combination of them all, that we'll be looking at as we go through. If anybody has any questions, just pop them right out. If you have your own stories to share, like you're seeing a larva and you have a burning burning story you want to share, don't save it, because if you're like me, you'll have forgotten it by the end of the talk. And I think we're ready to get started. Next. Oh, yes. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about what a nature journal is before I start looking at the pages and why we do it. It's basically a record of your observations, and it can be mostly verbal, it can be mostly visual. Generally, it's a combination of both of them. It also ties art and science together. You probably hear sometimes that you don't need to be an artist to be a nature journalist, and I think that's true on some level. What I do think is that anybody who pulls out a piece of paper and starts scrawling pictures on it and writing things next to it and then shows it to me, it's beautiful because it's capturing something. So no, you don't need to be an artist to be a nature journalist. You might get obsessed with it a little bit, as I have. I've taken so many drawing classes since I started nature journaling, but all you really need to do is record your observations. So how do you do that? It's generally recommended to use some metadata that is similar on all of it. You want to put your your date, the weather. You might want to talk about the substrate or where you found something, like if you're looking at a fungi or a mushroom, you might want to say, yeah, it was growing on leaf litter, or no, it was on the side of a tree, because that information will be helpful down the road. It's also a way to dig deeper into your subject. So when you see something, either take a bunch of pictures of it, or if you're in a place where you can collect a little bit of it and take it home to really study it, which I do like to do if I have that opportunity. When you draw it, you're looking at it in a different way than when you're just walking by it. You're really, if you have your hand lens out, which I often do, I actually, after I started doing this, bought a microscope because I like the teeny tiny things. So I'll throw them under the scope and take a good look at them. And then I surround myself. I've got a bit of an addiction for field guides, so I'll have my field guides all around. And I have the internet, so I'll look things up, and I'll draw, and I'll see, and I'll learn. And that's probably the greatest joy that I get out of nature journaling. So what did I discover? I've been nature journaling since 2016. What have I discovered? Next. So this was in January of this year. And, another thing, when you're writing down your observations, size is really important. So that right there is the actual size of this little larva. It was a sawfly larva. They get their name because the female ovipositor has a serrated edge that she used to cut into the stem of a branch to lay her egg. They also, when they exit, and there's a really great book by Charlie Eisman and Noah Charney called Signs and Tracks of Insects. Go to that. That is where I learned that if the adult, it's really a tough life as an insect out there. Lasis is in the larva. If the adult emerges, he comes to the top, he cuts a little ring, and it emerges out the side with leaves that attached. I never saw that in the field. I only saw them with the top completely missing. Or I saw them with a little exploded hole in the side. So if they have a hole in the side, it means that an ichneumon wasp, a parasitoid wasp, it's a tough world for the larva, had come across that larva and then inserted its own ovipositor into it, laid its own egg on the larva, which then ate the larva of the sawfly. No more sawfly. Another thing that could happen is when they're lying out there I saw this one on the snow, it could be picked up by a vole or a shrew and brought home because they're really tasty little packets of protein. So I was lucky enough to, this one I saw next to some blueberry bushes, and I like to draw the plant that they're next to, even though I don't think this was on the blueberry bush. That's where I found it. So I brought it home. It hadn't been eaten. It hadn't been taken by a vole, obviously. It hadn't had its Newman wasp lay its egg on top of it and then come out. It looked intact. So I brought it in and put it in my little bug box. And sure enough, it hatched in there, flew away, a nice little sawfly. And so now I have my very own perfectly intact larva with a cut top.
How long did it take to hatch?
Oh man, it was just a couple of weeks that I brought it in. I'm thinking maybe the warm house might have made it like come a little bit sooner. I kept it on my kitchen counter so I could keep an eye on it. It was fun. Next. So this is a leaf of a black walnut, and that is one leaf. Those aren't little leaves, it's a compound leaf. So another thing, like I said, measuring is good. This leaf was 17 inches long. My journals are only 11 inches wide, so it's really nice to put sizes down. Black walnuts also have, not sure what it is, but they're allelopathic, so they exert some kind of a hormone or an enzyme underneath their tree, underneath the branches, that makes it more difficult. It makes it a struggle for other plants to survive and grow. It does, however, make it really easy for scavengers like myself who wants to find the nuts. They're bright green. The husk, for those of you who are interested, makes a really nice ink, black walnut ink. You just cook it, it gets really black. Do not do that without latex gloves, because the hands will also be really, really black. I just add a little bit of isopropyl alcohol to it, and somebody told me to do this years ago, so I put in a little bit of cloves. Mine doesn't get moldy. I don't know if that's why or not, but I'm not going to stop now, so that works. Next. And here's my headless spider. Because I really think you should draw what you see. And I was out walking on the snow. That's about life size up there. And this spider came down, drifting down, walked around in the snow. I crouched down, took tons and tons of photographs of it. It's a lichen-colored orb weaver, beautiful patterns. I was totally fascinated by them. I didn't collect it. Obviously, you can't collect a spider. They're not really happy if you do that. So I went home and I was painting it when I realized not one of my photographs actually showed the head of this spider. Tempted though I was to plug it in, I did not. So there we go, headless spider in my journal. Next. And this is one of my favorite rites of spring. It's Symphocarpus fetatus. At least by the name, you know, fetid smell. It's skunk cabbage. It's one of our few thermogenic plants. It generates its own heat. So it comes up, the flowers come up in the spring before the leaves do. These have giant leaves. I don't know if you've seen them. They can be like 2 feet wide, 3 feet wide. They just spread. But the flowers come up long before the leaves do. And they're perfect flowers, so they're male and female on the inside. And they look kind of like dead meat. And I think that is their goal, because they're related to the corpse flower. They have a stinky smell. It's in the sap. And they also, because they generate the heat, are warm inside. Inside of that spathe is the spadix. And you can stick your finger in there, and it would be 15 to 20 degrees warmer than it is outside. I now have a field. Well, I don't own the field, but there's a field that I am familiar with, so I go to it when I start getting ready. Okay, April, I've got to start looking. There's my date, beginning of April, until I find these things emerging, and I go and poke my finger in there and get really happy that they're back. The heat, the pollinators, I think, are typically flies, so they also are carrion eaters. That's another reason for them to have the carrion color and the carrion smell and to generate the heat. Next. Raccoon skull. There are no raccoons here, are there? Wow. Yeah. It can be a nuisance if you have garbage cans. I don't actually have a raccoon skull, although they're quite striking and beautiful. The Maine Master Naturalist program has a large library of clonable furs and skulls and samples of things. They have the best scat sample collection I've ever seen. It's pretty cool. So I borrowed that to draw, and it was an exercise because I think of a skull as being white, as being light. And I'm drawing, you always hear from watercolor, you're supposed to leave the white. And by the time I was done with this, there was absolutely no white left, which is just supposed to show that what you think you're seeing, which is white, isn't. It was all shades of ivory and cream and brown. And I mentioned the Maine Master Naturalist program. I'm going to give them a brief plug here. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the program. It's similar to the Maine Master Gardener program. It's a year-long program, and what they do is teach you about natural history throughout that calendar year. So in the winter, you'll be doing animal tracking, looking at skulls. In the summer, you'll be looking at flowers and flowering plants, perhaps geology. Spring, vernal pools, you're out there looking at fairy shrimp and amphibians and other such things. The purpose of the Naturalist program, you get a certificate at the end, is to go out and volunteer. So they want people to be naturalists, which I'm a naturalist. I'm not a botanist. I'm not an entomologist. If I had another life, I would probably be both. But since I'm not, I get to do this instead. Next. Because we live in Maine, we're fortunate enough to have the ocean nearby. This is a marine algae called fucus. I think its common name is bladderwrack. You know when it dries up how really black it gets on the shore? And sometimes you see these little white spots on them. I probably walked by them many, many times and never really looked at them closely. I did bring some. I've got some in a bowl over there. They're not from Monhegan, but they're going back home to where I got them. There's a hand lens. You're welcome to go after this and take a look at them up closely. They curl in two different directions. Maine has two different species of polychaete tube worms on fucus. The first time I heard about them, mine curled from the opening to the left. That's what I figured out. There's another one that curls to the right. But I've never seen it, and now it's a habit of mine when I go to a new beach or a new area to go find the fucus and pick it up and get my hand lens and take a closer look at that polychaete worm. It's one of the reasons I went down to the Pebble Beach this morning. Along that edge, I was hoping to find some fucus with polychaetes that curved to the right, but I didn't actually find any at all. So either you don't have them, but you definitely didn't have the ones that I've been hunting for. Next. So, one of my reasons for drawing is to learn. And how many times did I walk by all the different crab shells and I didn't really know which one was which? It was time for me to find out. The green crab shell is generally pretty easy to separate because it's got a different shape than the others. It has a narrow base, and then the sides go like that. There's a steeper angle, and just a small arc at the top. But both the Jonah and the rock crabs have a much bigger, shallow bottom and a much deeper arch, kind of like in the middle of summer when the sun has a long, long, long way to go over the sky. So the green, you can't tell by color. In that one, the green looks really green, but once they dry, color is not a good gauge of which shell they are. And neither is size, because of course you can have a really small Jonah crab or a really small rock crab that might be smaller than a green crab. A really good way to tell, or the way that I learned from doing these drawings, is to count the teeth on the edge. So from where the eyes are, the eye stalks, on both the Jonah and the rock, there are 9, they call them teeth, 9 serrated things on either side, which is great, but it still doesn't give us how to tell them apart. But the Jonah crab is serrated at the top, whereas I don't have a drawing of a smooth one. And the rock crab, those teeth are completely smooth. So here, instead of having those points, it's a smooth edge. And there's a bowl that has both Jonah and rock and green. So if you want to come up and look at them up close, you can actually see that difference for yourself. Yeah. Okay, next. You do have blueberries here. Maybe not as many as I have near Acadia or close to Millbridge, where there are lots and lots of fields. And it's become a big business in Maine. But they have these really interesting flowers that are tubular. I'm sure you've seen them. They're white, they drop down like that. It's like, how does a pollinator get into that? Pollen is not just there out in the open like it would be on a daisy or an aster where you can almost blow it and see the pollen sitting on top, just waiting for the bees to come in and get near it and carry it away. They've got to fight hard for this pollen. First of all, the plant is tubular, and then inside, the anthers, which are the parts that hold the pollen, are also tubular. They're called porocidal anthers. They have a pore at the tip. That pollen isn't coming out from anyone. So how do the bees get the pollen out of it? There's something called sonification or buzz pollination, wherein not honeybees, because they're not native, but our native bees, bumblebees and solitary bees, go over to the flower, attach themselves to it, shake and vibrate their wing muscles without vibrating their wings. They're just vibrating their wing muscles until they reach 440 hertz. Someone has actually measured that. It wasn't me, but it's the same thing that a tuning fork will do for you. So you can take a tuning fork and go play with yours. This is typical for blueberries, and it's also for flowers in the Solanaceae family, the nightshades. And I did see some out on the trail near the lighthouse this morning, and they were in flower, and they did have these beautiful yellow porocidal anthers, so take your tuning forks. But I also have a video that shows this happening, which is pretty cool. Next.
So right by the lighthouse or next to the lighthouse?
Yeah, do you know that, I think it's called nightshade, that beautiful vine that has like purple flowers with the petals curved back, and that yellow center that you see, if you look up close, that's actually 5 tubular anthers all in a little circle.
Okay.
Which I think is what we're seeing here. This is definitely not a blueberry. That's probably the nightshade. Can we hit the play? I didn't put the music to it. So the bee is there.
In this clip, we have substituted a tuning fork for the bee, so you can see the pollen flow uninhibited.
That's the tuning fork. Is that incredible? Yeah. Buzz pollination or sonification. It's happening right here.
So relatively speaking, a lot.
It is a lot. That's a lot of pollen. Next. So you have these guys too, although I didn't see them, I looked for them. I know they're here. They're Jack in the pulpits, or they should probably be called Jill in the pulpits, because they change sexes. Many plants have really strange sex lives. They go from male to female. There'll be a male in the years when there's not a lot of nutrient in their corms, so they don't want to waste energy putting out reproductive parts, but if it's a good year, there'll be females if they've got a lot of nutrients. A lot of people, when there are no flower, because this is the flower right here, when there is no flower, sometimes people get them mixed up with trilliums because they have 3 leaves, but an easy way to tell them apart is that for the Jack in the pulpit, it is 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock. For the trillium, it's 12 o'clock, 4:30, 7:30. So when you see them like that, you don't need the flower any longer. You can tell the trillium from the Jack in the pulpit. These plants have some kind of strange, almost like glass, oxalate crystals inside of them. And if you eat them, why not? You want to be out foraging. If you eat them, they will really make your mouth be filled with pain and be swollen. I don't know if they bleed, but it apparently just takes, like, just break it and touch it to your tongue, and you will immediately stop eating it, which is good, because if you ate a lot more, you could probably do a lot of damage to your internal organs. So that's it for Jack and Jill. Next. Drawing is not very difficult. Seeing is the problem. I think we've referred to this before, that you really need to look at what you are drawing to understand it. It's so easy to draw what you think you see. Like, yeah, that table's supposed to have 4 legs, but if it's at a certain angle, you might not see it. And if you draw it in, you're not doing perspective very well, and it will show that there's a problem there. About drawing not being very difficult, well, Betty, I'm not so sure I agree with that 100%, because I spend a lot of time trying to draw, and it can sometimes be challenging. Next. This doesn't have a date, because I was just beginning to journal then. This was my first year of journaling when I was studying the Maine Master Naturalist program, and one of our assignments was to draw 4 non-insect arthropods. And I chose a spider, and I was at the Isles for Dock restaurant near where we live, waiting in a long line for dinner, and there was this really beautiful spider, so I took notes and did sketches, took tons of photographs, came home, drew it using pencil. I hadn't started using watercolor then. It was several years later that I was at a 3-hour insect spider workshop at Hirundu, and the woman leading it started talking about anatomy of spiders and said, you can really tell the male and the female adults very, very simply apart. And now you can all do this too if you don't know beforehand. Because the males all have engorged pedipalps. They have these, right there, appendages, and they're called boxing gloves. And so next time you see a spider, look close. If you see those engorged pedipalps, you are looking at an adult male spider. Impress all your friends with that. But when I drew it, I didn't notice that. I vaguely remembered it. So when she said that, I was very excited and went rushing home to get my journal and flipped out and found it. And sure enough, I had drawn a male adult spider without even knowing it. So that's another way that journaling is helpful, because it's recording information that you may not even know you're recording. Next. The acorn weevil larva. There are lots of larvas in the world, and there are probably a lot in this slideshow because they're pretty cool. This one is the acorn weevil larva. The female will put its egg in the beginning when the acorn is first forming, and it spends the whole summer inside there. If you find one that's frass is a very great word for insect scat or poop. And when it falls to the ground, it makes this perfect little exit hole. And most insect exit holes are like perfectly round. I don't know how they do it, but they're quite remarkable. And goes quickly squiggling into the ground. There's a book by Doug Tallamy called The Nature of Oaks, and in it he said, I love hands-on stuff, he said, go gather some acorns, bring them home, put them in a plastic bag, and you can see the larva when it comes out. He said 3 days. I had my little plastic bag outside my front door for, more like 3 weeks, but sure enough, I found 2 really small, beautiful larvae, which I painted. But with great excitement, I brought them back to my neighbor's oak tree, which is where I had collected the acorns, and got my camera out. I'm all ready to take a video of this little guy squiggling down. It was one larva at that point. Set it on the ground, and before my astonished eyes, an ant had picked it up and it away. It's a tough road out there.
That ant was psyched though.
That ant was psyched. Yeah, larvae are really nice little packages of protein. So, next. Oh, one more thing about because I love how nature uses things multiply. After the larva has exited, if it wasn't broken in half like the one that I drew, there's some teeny tiny ants in the Temnothorax family that are so small, they use that exit hole to go in and there'll be an entire colony of little ants living inside an acorn.
Mm-hmm.
It'll make you think differently when you walk by and see an acorn laying on the ground too. So these are candle snuff fungi. They look kind of like Cladonia lichens, but they're not. They get their name from if you flick them, a puff of spores comes flying out. For me, it's an example of you never find what you're looking for. I had been visiting my daughter in Washington State, and she lived in an area where people had cans out, and there was a bobcat that had been on almost every night that I was there. Somebody else was spotting it in a different place in the neighborhood. So I'd ask her in the morning, where was it seen last night? And I'd go trotting out. I didn't need to see the bobcat. I just wanted to see scat or maybe a track. But I didn't find either. I did, however, find these guys, and they were really cool. I also found out, I'd never seen them before, that we have them in Maine. So this was just last winter. So now I'm going to start looking for them. And from having journaled about them, I'll know them when I see them. I'll be able to recognize it. So, yeah, I had not even gotten back to Maine. I think I was in layover when she sent me a video of the bobcat walking on a fence between her neighbors behind her. Oh well, I'll be out again. Next. Oh, there's a video of somebody doing that. Can you play it?
Oh, wow.
It's similar to in the spring. This year was a good example. Our jack pines were loaded with pollen, and they're low growing. But the white pines, forget it. You're not going to be able to do it. But the jack pines, do you have jack pines here? You probably don't. No, that's right. Speckled alder also does that. When the catkins are hanging down, and I saw a lot of speckled alder up there. So in the spring, when those things are large and verdant with pollen, give them a flick. And that's yellow rather than white, but it'll be just a wonderful little puff of yellow. Next. And you do have this here too. And a lot of people call it Gelder rose. Other people say it's high bush cranberry. It's not a cranberry, and it isn't a rose. It's a viburnum. So when you pass it on the trail, and I saw that near the lighthouse too, just be a little respectful and call it what it is. It's a viburnum. They are edible, and it's a viburnum. Neither a rose nor vaccinium cranberry have opposite branches, so that's a dead giveaway that it's neither one of those. But it's also a good example of how important scientific names are, that people get really confused when they're using common names. Next. This is 2022. I had taken an urban sketching class, and they had a whole different technique of what I've been using. It was just using micron pens and quickly outlining whatever it is you're drawing, and then splashing some paint on it. It's a really fast way of drawing. It's actually the only one I did that way. And now that I'm looking at it, I think I need to start doing some more of it. It was fun and didn't take as long. And I'd never known what a thrip was before. They're very, yeah, I know, they're like problems with people, right? Get the thrips out of my garden. I had never seen them. They were coated with pollen, which was really eye-catching and beautiful. They have wings, but they're it's like they really don't use them. They don't fly, which also made them great as a subject because I could get down there with my hand lens and really study them, unlike a fly or a bee, which they're not that efficient. Next. And this is another hands-on thing, but you don't have it here. I looked around. It's a wasp. It's a wasp that doesn't bite, that makes a gall in roses, and it also makes galls in Rosa rugosa, which you do have, and I did lift every single Rosa rugosa I saw this morning, and I don't see a sign of it. So I'm not going to advise you to do what I did. A lot of people don't like those, they call them unsightly galls. My girlfriend had a bunch, she had clipped them, they were ready to go in the burn pile. I was like, okay, don't burn it. So I took it home, and I cut one of them in half. Not sure how I didn't destroy any of the larvae, because I really didn't know what I was looking for. I thought there might be one large cavity. There must have been 15 or 20 teeny tiny small cavities. I put it next to my microscope. I looked at it every day. I probably looked at it 3 times a day. It's the chance to watch something metamorphose is unbelievable. Going from a white, fleshy grub, really opaque, becoming slowly translucent. You can start seeing the shape of the wings. You can start seeing the legs. This one crawled out and crept out. I probably have 3 hours of video footage as it made its way slowly out. And they don't live very long. They're like Luna moths and many other insects that don't have mouths. They just come out, they mate, and then they die. So this one, the picture here is a different branch that shows all the exit holes. So you can get an idea of just how many little larvae there were inside of that. Next, another rite of spring. This is a fairy shrimp, which not all vernal pools have them. I'm really lucky to have a vernal pool on our family property that does have fairy shrimp. They're remarkable. You see them, even if you don't see them in life, you're going to recognize them when you see them. So I'd gone down to our family pond and done a scoop. I was looking for caddisfly larvae that I wanted to draw. And instead I had 12 squirming fairy shrimp in there. So it was very, very exciting. Again, I have lots of videos of the female. The female has a brood sac on her belly and a smaller head. The male has long, like elephant tusks. They're pink. They're claspers for clasping the female when they're mating. The female eggs, you can go to the next one, there's a video that I took of her. It looks like a front-loading washing machine. They're just rotating and rotating. Can we hit the play on that? So those are her cilia that are feeding. Isn't that, I could watch that for hours. I have lots of videos of female fairy shrimp too. Next. Another spider, also in winter, because it's easy to see them in the winter. When they fall on the snow, they really stand out. This particular one, it's another orb weaver, a long-jawed orb weaver. The colors are so striking. Looks like watermelon tourmaline. It's bright, bright green, bright, bright pink. And just on the surface of the snow. I don't know if there's any reason for this, but when I saw the lichen-colored orb weaver, the other spiders I saw that day in the same area were all lichen-colored orb weavers. When I saw this one with another friend, the only spiders we saw that day were this one. So I'm not going to draw conclusions. I'm just stating what we saw. Next. This is done on toned paper. I also teach classes on toned paper on drawing. It's a really fast way to draw because you've got your midtones are all done. So all you need to do is put in their highlights and your shadows and poof. I wanted to test it, so a friend of mine had a long-tailed weasel and sent me a photograph of it from her backyard. And I timed myself, and not including everything else, but just this part here, from start to finish, was 4 minutes. So it really is a super fast way of drawing. There's no color to distract. You're not mixing watercolors. You don't have to have all this palette and stuff set out. It's really simple. It's really fast. And as a journalist, using toned paper is just another thing that you want in your toolkit. So, and I'm going to show you my, can I move for a minute? So, when I had to start journaling in 2016, I couldn't decide what I wanted to do, so I came up with an idea where it's just 8.5 by 11 sheets that I punch holes in, and then I put the pages in. So I can have toned paper when I want, and then when I started watercoloring, I am playing around with different kinds of watercolor paper. So I write on the back what kind of watercolor paper it is, so then I can go through and say, oh, this one had a lot of like sizing and it like bunched up, and this one buckled a little bit. I have decided I like hot press paper. I like the smooth. I don't like the bumpy paper. So I pretty much always use hot presses, but I'm still figuring out which one is my favorite one. Cladonia cristatella. Everybody likes this lichen, I think. I call it the gateway lichen. It's often the first lichen people learn because it's really bright and showy. It has a super catchy name, British Soldiers. It's cosmopolitan. It will be in any place on the planet except for the Antarctic, which there are some lichens that are more specialist. They need to have certain habitats. And it's pollution tolerant, unlike Lobelia pulmonaria, that one that grows on the sides of the trees, is considered a good air indicator. You will only find that in certain spaces. This one, it can grow next to the dump of bad air. It doesn't care, it's everywhere. So that's why it's everybody's first lichen. Well, maybe not, but it's frequently the first lichen, and I call it the gateway lichen. And this is watercolor too. When was that? Oh, that was this January. It's not like I hadn't seen them before, but sometimes you just look at something differently and say, oh, it's time for me to really study you and draw you. That's what I did this January. Next, back to the ocean. Again, oh no, we're right over. Oh well. I wanted to learn the different periwinkles. We have 3 here in Maine. We've got rough periwinkles, smooth periwinkles, and common periwinkles. The common is the most common, but it's also invasive. It came over here, I think, in the 1800s or late 1700s. The others exist. They're in different levels of the tidal zone and have different reproductive strategies. What you can't see behind here is a perfect circle on the periwinkle. It's round, and I do have a bowl that has them in there, so if you want to look at a dog whelk versus a periwinkle, you can. Periwinkles have an operculum, which will close them in with their seawater when the tide goes out, so they can survive. The dog whelk doesn't have that. The dog whelk has a round edge there, so you really won't find those except where they're in the water. Another way to tell them apart, the dog whelk, think dog, think carnivore, is carnivorous. It eats meat. The periwinkle is a vegetarian. It grazes and eats algae. The dog whelk, again, think the canine tooth is really sharp and pointy, and the point on a dog whelk is a little bit sharper than the point on a periwinkle. Next. Anything becomes interesting if you look at it. Oh no! Typo! Oh my gosh. I used to be a graphic designer. I can't believe that. You know how that is? That's the joke where you say the twice, your eye goes right over it. You guys probably all saw that before I did. Anyway, before I give this talk again, that will be fixed. So yeah, anything becomes interesting if you look at it long enough. If you look at it long enough, including, next, a slug. So yeah, I have slugs in my garden. I grew up with slugs. Slugs were everywhere. I didn't give them a huge amount of thought, except maybe put beer when they were eating my lettuce leaves. I sleep out in a summer bedroom from my house. It's a screened-in porch. And one morning I woke up and there was a slug on the outside. Instead of my first thought being, get that away from there, I don't want that slimy trail. I was like, wow, look at how its foot is undulating. It was neat. I ran in and got a petri dish. It very obligingly sat in there. It was not running away. I brought it back and looked at it under the microscope. I'd never given it a really close look. And it was just contentedly breathing through this little slit in the side I didn't even know existed, called a pneumostome, which is that thing right there. So they open and close gently and breathe. So next time you see a garden slug, pick it up and you might see it breathing in your hand. 80% of them have the slit on the right-hand side, have the pore on the right-hand side. I don't know if anybody knows why. Most people are right-handed. I'm not sure what the reason is for that, but look on the right-hand side first anyway. Next. This was a challenge for me. My great-granddaughter had been given a nest, wasp nest, paper wasp nest. And I was at her house, and she said, I want you to draw it. She calls me KK. KK, I want you to draw this. And I'm there, no. And her mom's saying, don't you want to bring it to school? She was in kindergarten at the time. I said, no, I want KK to draw it. I had to draw it, even though that probably wasn't on my list, because I think they're kind of challenging to draw. I would, knowing that she was going to look at this one, I very carefully worked on the nest part. I was really happy with it, and I had left places where I was going to draw the leaves later, paint the leaves later. Changed my palette, got rid of my grays, pulled my browns out, and went splop. And, oh, no, I can't redraw all this. And in a previous life, before I started doing all of this, I was a website designer and had the honor and pleasure of doing a website for the Ashley Bryan Center. He's a children's author and illustrator, really wonderful man. And I'm sure I'm one of many people he said this to when I went out to talk to him about the website. And he was giving me a book and he was inscribing it. And he said, when I make a mistake, I turn it into a flower. And before I had time to panic and be sad about this, I could hear him talking, saying that, and I channeled it, and you want me to show you where the splotch was? No, see, you can't tell. So it's somewhere in the shadows of the leaf. So if you make a mistake, think of Ashley Bryan, turn it into a flower. Next. So here, the complete opposite spectrum from that toned paper drawing. I am getting obsessed with journaling, as you can probably tell, and trying to ramp up my watercolor skills. And I took a class with a woman named Mindy Lighthite at Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens. And we were supposed to bring a specimen in. I didn't have a specimen. This one had landed on my back table. I took tons and tons of pictures of it. I spent 2 days working on this thing. Didn't have any notes around it. It was actually in the other orientation. I learned a lot about painting from her, and it was great. Then I'm done. I have this thing, which I'm never going to put on my wall. I said, all right, I'll turn it into a journal page. So I rotated it and turned it into a journal page. And why am I stopping? Do I have time? I don't know. All right. One more thing about this is I take other classes too. I take entomology classes. I take plant count. I'm an addict. Any class I can take. The Maine Entomological Society, if you're not familiar with them, they're really welcoming. They have lectures. There's an annual lecture, typically given by somebody named Dr. Istvan Mishko. And he's talking about insect adaptations with plants and coevolution. It's really all fascinating. I wrote lots of notes and maybe remember half of it. But he repeated throughout the lecture, if you remember nothing else, remember this. Insects are two-dimensional, which is really a hard thing to think about. But I get it now, because they're exoskeleton. So all those things that I was drawing or painting aren't hairs. They're projections sticking out of the exoskeleton. So if you take away nothing else from this evening, think of Dr. Istvan. Insects are two-dimensional. Next. Gaultheria procumbens, wintergreen. You probably, I don't know if you have that here or not.
Yeah.
Do you? Okay. Yep. It's very tasty. Definitely tastes like wintergreen. The leaves, if you crush them, are very wintergreeny. It's always fun to cut things in half and take a look at how they're put together. These I collected in March, and I'm going to say they're nowhere near as tasty as if you collect them earlier. They start getting a lot drier later on in the season. Next. This is one of the few pages we're going to see multiple things on it. I was with a friend. She was a master naturalist at Meadow Whistler outside of Greenville. And our job was, besides leading walks and things, to do the bonfire. So one night we had a bonfire going, and a young girl came up to the picnic table with these pieces of egg. She said they were osprey eggs, which I would not have known, but hopefully she's right. But she said the ranger told her those were osprey eggs. And when she was leaving, when the family was leaving, they left them on the table. I said, don't you want them? They went, no. So I took them back to my cabin. I painted them. The next day, the family came over to see what I was doing. They looked through my journal. They saw this. They went, oh, that's the eggshell that you want. Yeah. Later that afternoon, the mother came up to me and said, would you mind giving one of those pieces of shell back to my daughter. I think the girl was around 11 or so. I went, yeah, sure. She really wants to start doing nature journaling. And she wants to draw that. Oh my gosh. So I actually had them all wrapped up, so I gave her the box and away they went. But I love sharing this slide because I like to think that somewhere right now out there is a young girl who has a nature journaling habit because of the osprey egg that she found at Meadowmist. Next. This is an example of pencil, which it's really nice to work with the same like the toned paper because it gets rid of the color. You're just looking at texture and shape. This is a really old plant. I think it's classified, it's sometimes called a fern ally, which is just like this catch-all name, which doesn't really mean much, but this is a fern ally. And what I think is interesting about it is that you can actually buy online chopped up tiny bits of this ecosystem. It's also called horsetail or scouring rush because it has silica in it. And in a really nice kind of circular story, ecosystem ground up and powdered is used by people who are making super high-end violins that have the end of it, which is called a crozier or a fiddlehead, which is another fern. So bits of this ecosystem are used to polish the fiddlehead on a violin. Next. You do have red and white here, and I have some over there. Red spruce and white spruce, Picea rubens, Picea glaucus. And again, I want you to look at the two different ones and tell them apart. If you haven't done that already, there is the bowl that has both of them. The red spruce is much more oval and ovoid, and the white spruce is pretty cylindrical. Next. I have learned that when I have not drawn, I've never really seen. And when I start drawing an ordinary thing, I realize how extraordinary it is. Which is true. Is end up seeing. And nature journaling isn't as much about drawing as it is about observing and really looking at your subject. Next. Okay. So, December 2023. I have passed white pines over 60 years looking at white pines. I never ever saw aphids on a white pine needle. I had a friend visiting from Florida, and his daughter wanted to make some kind of spritzy drink that she'd seen online, so they went and collected some white pine needles, where we had been, I think, the day before. And she did due diligence. She looked them up and sent me a picture saying, look, white pine aphids. I was like, oh my gosh, because I'd never seen them. And then every time I went by a white pine, I would be hunting for them. She just comes up here from Florida. She'd never even seen snow before. Yeah. So I did find some this year, and I was very excited. I'm going to go back there next spring and see if I can see them. I went back and watched them until the aphids hatched and was able to see the ants come up and start doing their thing because aphids really have good marketing. They call their scat or whatever honeydew. Okay. Because ants will eat that and they take care of the aphids so that they can get it. And there's a little jar in there. When the lights come back on afterwards, if you want to see the eggs, it's a slightly dried up needle. It's in a case. Don't take it out of the case, but if you look closely, you can see the aphid eggs lined up on that needle and a few that have fallen off into the jar. Next. Back to the ocean. These are our barnacles, which are also very cool. They start out free-floating, little nautilus, they're larvae. They go through the water until they find a spot to land. They have a really strong glue, and they take their heads and stick their heads onto the rocks, and it's their feet that come up in the air and are filtering. Yeah, I've seen a park ranger demonstrate this. I'm not going to do it. It's pretty hysterical. And then they build the case around them. The glue is so strong that when they die and those are gone, there will be the imprint of the glue still on that rock for years to come. I think it's something that science needs to investigate and create a glue like that. All barnacles are hermaphroditic. They have male and female parts in them, and when it's time to reproduce, the male extends a sperm tube that is up to 8 times its length, because everything else around it is stationary, until it finds another barnacle that is willing to be the receptive female. They fertilize it, they send those little larvae back, and it starts all over again. Next. Oh yeah, we have a video. This was in my aquarium, because I brought them home to Maine. So I had them on my kitchen counter for a while, filter feeding. Can you hit the play? And I could watch them for hours too. Yeah. If you find a tide pool, you can probably do it as well, but it was fun having them on my kitchen counter for a while. Next. So another example of looking closely at things, we have 2 different kinds of Typhaceae, quick Typhaceae, cattails here. And you only have the broadleaf, I believe. And one way to tell them apart in the field, this is the broadleaf here. The males are already gone, but the males are coming very, very close to where the female parts are. On the narrow leaf, there's a big gap here. You can't always tell by the size of the leaf. Theoretically, the narrower. Sometimes it's obvious, but if you're just seeing one, you might not know. So this is an example of using liquid masking fluid, which I think I tried in high school, but I haven't tried for many, many years. The concept behind it is you paint this stuff, it's kind of like rubber cement on your paper, and then you paint over it, and when it's completely dry, you rub off the masking fluid, and you will be left with some white lines behind. So this is the first time I did it in I don't know how many years. Not 100% successful, but I think it's a great tool, and I'll use it again. So those white lines of the paper, I didn't paint in around it. I put the masking fluid down, painted with liquid graphite, which is another good piece, another tool to use, and then rubbed it off. Next. Oops, it's okay. Okay. So, we talked about common names like the gilded rose, and this is one little creature that has more than 150 names, 150 common names. It's a monkey pig, it's a parson pig, it's a pissabed. Do any of you know what it is?
So those little things that form into a circle look like an armadillo?
Yeah, some do.
Pillbug.
Some do. Yeah. Yep. It's also a
Oh, look, an
pishabed.
armadillo.
Armadillo, yes. Okay. Yeah. So we can actually go through 2 now, because the next one is the spoiler page. When I do this on my own, I have to have that in between, otherwise I go right to the giveaway. It is a pillbug, or a sowbug, or a potato bug, or a woodlouse, or a Pelosia muscarum. I actually made a T-shirt that says "I love a louse" and has a louse. So I had my niece in my backyard, and her friend came over. They were 6 years old. What are you going to do? You're going to look for insects, of course. What else do you do? So you're poking around, and we came across a woodlouse. I have these little collecting plastic, like, little tubes that we put this woodlouse in, but Lizzie said, "Oh, it's a potato bug," which is why I use these names. And Hilda, my niece, said, "No, it's a sow bug." And Lizzie's very determined, "No, it's a potato bug." My mother told me it's a potato bug. And Hilda said, "No, it's a sow bug. She gave me a book. We can go look in the book." "No, it's a potato bug." But before they kind of duped it out, I said, perfect time to talk about scientific nomenclature. They're not too young. So I explained that they were both right. But as we were talking, I'm hoping that we didn't stress this little creature out, but it gave birth to 32.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. They were a little white. They were running around inside the tube. So we looked at them with our lenses and then we put them down. But why did she give birth? What was going on? Next. And I'm going to talk a little bit about woodlice because I think they're my absolutely favorite creature on the planet, and I want other people to love them too, because they should. So this little bug had 32 things, and it was in its pouch. It was in a marsupial pouch. It's not a mammal. It's not lactating. It's not giving them milk. When the woodlice are born, all 32 of them, the female puts them in her pouch and takes care of them for 30 days or so, and then they crawl out, and then they live. Pill bugs don't bite. They carry no disease. Think about ticks. Think about all these things that carry disease. They do no harm to humans. They don't even eat our tomato plants, all these things that grow on our tomato plants. They're really pretty innocuous. Unfortunately, they do have a species that does go after them, and that's a bird. I think it's typically the starling. Because they are detrivores and they eat dung and poop, they would be eating the poop of a bird, and inside it is a parasite. It's a worm. And when the worm gets inside their body, it takes over their body and says to this little woodlouse that likes to live in the dark and the damp, "Go forth, woodlouse, into a dry, sunny spot." And it does, because it's been taken over. They sometimes call them zombie woodlouse. So it goes out into the field or into a flat place where a starling or a bird will see it, pick it up, eat it, and now it's time for the second stage of that parasite. Lives its whole life in the starling, doesn't hurt the starling at all, gets sent down to the ground again for another woodlouse to absorb it and die. Poor woodlouse. All right, so we need a couple more things that will tell you how wonderful woodlice are. They are our only terrestrial crustacean. They're related to crabs, not spiders. They're the only thing that came out of the ocean, brave little fellows, to make their living, which is why they need to be in dark, wet places. They have modified gills. They don't have lungs. So they need moisture in order to get oxygen into their body. Yeah, they are really cool. And this is it. They mate for life. They live in communities with their relatives and their other relatives and take care of their little babies, and they mate for life. Think of, it's not an insect, it's a crustacean, terrestrial crustacean. It's the only one that does that. Next. So there are lots of extraordinary, wonderful things out there for us to see. They're not so far away, and there's probably a woodlouse pretty close to you too. Thank you.
Thank you. So.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to thank you all for coming. Thank you so much, Karen. That was wonderful. Thank you all for coming out tonight, and I hope we see you at one of our future talks the next 3 Thursdays. Thank you for supporting Monhegan Associates. And you don't need to pick up your chairs tonight. We have a tomorrow night film on Jamie Wyeth at 7:30 right here in these chairs.
You said you were going to post this one on your website. Will you be posting the others as well?
If all goes well. Yes, all subject to technology, but we will do our best.
Okay. And we have, if you do go on the website, we have several posted from the last few years as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, neat.
So-
Because we don't always, we're not here long enough
Yeah.
to see all of them.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, no, there's several years worth on there
Oh,
already,
great.
so, yeah, check them out. Thank you.
And if you want to look at any of these things that I talked
Yes.
about, you're welcome to take a peek.
Where's your picture journal?